مشاهدينا من جديد. غرازيلا، تعرفين أن أكثر من 3 مليارات و400 مليون شخص يمارسون ألعاب الفيديو حول العالم. نسلط طبعا الضوء في هذا موطن الحلم والإنجاز على صناعة الترفيه الرقمي وتقنية البلوكتشين وتحول المنصات التقليدية إلى ألعاب رقمية.
بالفعل، ودبي كانت محطة مركزية لرجل الأعمال ياتسو المؤسس الشريك والرئيس التنفيذي لشركة أنيموكا براندز من رحلته من تأسيس بهونغ كونغ طبعا سايبر سيتي إلى مشاركته بتأسيس أنيموكا براندز.
نعم،
أكون عم بلفظ الاسم صح.
اللقاء الذي أجرته هالة بوعلوان مع ياتسو الذي يقيم مشاريع في دولة الإمارات تناول تركيز أنيموكا براند على الترفيه الرقمي وتقنية البلوكتشين وتحول المنصات التقليدية إلى ألعاب رقمية، كما تنطرق أو تتطرق إلى توقعاتها لمستقبل تقنية البلوكتشين في مجال ألعاب الترفيه والتحول الرقمي وتقنية البلوكتشين.
بيسعدنا أنه يكون معنا اليوم شريك المؤسس لشركة أنيموكا براندز السيد ياتسو. Good morning, Yat. Great to have you here.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Dubai. When did you arrive?
I arrived here about 5 or 6 days ago, here for a conference, and also we do quite a bit of business here, so it's always a pleasure to be here.
And are you coming back soon?
I'll be here very soon.
Amazing, amazing. Yat, you have so many milestones in your career. Like I think it takes several interviews to cover. But if we wanna hear about this journey from you, from the moment you founded Cyber City in Hong Kong until you co-founded Animoca Brands. If you can tell us about that.
Well, I mean, I founded Cyber City actually back in 95, 96, so that was a really long time ago. It was really a product that came from an earlier initiative that I did in Hong Kong called Hong Kong Online, which was probably Hong Kong's one of the very first internet service providers.
Which year was that?
That was in 93 or so, 94. This, you have sort of in context, there were probably only maybe 2 or 3 million people on the whole internet back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And of course today, you know, you have like 6 billion people or something. But, you know, that was kind of the time. And Cyber City was a way to try to bring more people online because I found that young people wanted to express themselves. And so they had websites and blogs, equivalent at the time. And, you know, in the US, they had a version of that called GeoCities, for those of you who might remember. Yeah. And in Asia, we had Hong Kong Cyber City, and that was basically my product. That product eventually, that company was sold eventually during the initial run of the dot-com boom in the late 90s. And with that, I ended up starting Outblaze.
Amazing. And that also another milestone, which is the acquisition of Outblaze. Outblaze, I think when you took over, there were so many challenges and you were able to flip it around. And this flipping around attracted the acquisition of IBM. If you can tell us also about Outblaze and what really attracted IBM to that, and what's the impact not only on Hong Kong market, I think globally.
Outblaze was probably at one point one of the largest independent email service providers in the world, and it was also pioneering what today we call cloud computing.
Yes.
But back then it was called ESP. We were basically the pioneer in providing email and messaging services and third-party blog services. All the major websites in the world actually were using our web services. But of course, in that time, this was now 98, 99, there was no real revenue model. It was all promise. You know, even companies like Amazon that had just started at a point were also not making money per se, right? It was more like growth opportunities. It was like the early days of the internet. And as we pushed over to sort of bring more customers to our services, it was actually a little bit also trying to convince people at the time why they should be using the internet as well, which is kind of similar to where we find ourselves in these cycles. But anyway, in due course, Outblaze became one of the biggest email service providers as a cloud computing platform. And in 2009, IBM acquired our business to become part of Lotus Notes, which at the time was, you know, one of the biggest email service companies in the world. But they didn't have a cloud computing platform. You know, at that point, Gmail basically and sort of Google as well as Microsoft came out with Microsoft 360. So they're all doing cloud businesses. And so our business basically was sort of the missing puzzle that IBM needed.
Yes.
And the impact was that it was probably one of the very first major acquisitions of a tech company in Hong Kong, but also for the region by someone as big as IBM. IBM actually wouldn't normally build R&D in Asia, particularly in Hong Kong, but this basically became an R&D outfit. And I also remember, this wasn't a very big company. We had about 150 to 200 people, and I remember the due diligence. IBM sent over 200 people to do the due diligence.
Oh my God!
I was just kind of, it was
200 people.
Yeah, it was probably probably the most intensive due diligence we've ever experienced, because for a company the size of IBM, they wouldn't acquire small businesses. They have to acquire a company that has some meaning behind it. But of course, every department, every division would come over. That was also a really eye-opening experience for me as well.
Exactly, exactly. And yet, if we want to move to gamification and blockchain technology, as we were talking before we started the filming, I think blockchain definitely is the main now core element to gamification. At the same time, you know, how we were discussing, there's this sometimes two opinions. The traditional gamers who love to focus on the game only, and you know, and win, and that's what's the return on investment for them. And now the current gamers who would love to have NFTs, love to have tokens. Where do you see like the fine line between those two?
So when you think about what Web3, in this case, what you're describing, and blockchain technology has done to games, we think of that as the natural iteration of not only games, but the internet as a whole.
Yeah.
So broadly speaking, everything will be, from our perspective, tokenized. Everything will have an element of digital assets embedded, because our time online, our digital time online, actually is valuable.
Yes.
And so it doesn't just mean in games, even in social media, for instance. The amount of time that you spend, like all our kids or even adults, when they post photos on Instagram or when they're spending time on TikTok or whatever service that they do, ask yourself the question, where does the value accrue? Which social network is expanding? You're bringing your friends and your contacts into the social network, but do you own them? Do you actually benefit? And the answer is actually, generally no. The platform actually takes away all of these assets and then gives you the illusion that you have ownership, but in reality, you don't own any of it. And so gaming today, about 3.4 billion people in the world play games on a regular basis. It's an industry that is larger than music and movies combined. It is the primary way in which we consume, I would say, pop culture, and certainly for our children, it is the probably dominant culture. And this, however, is controlled by really a set of companies that really are maximizing their profits. But what is the value of a game without the gamers? Imagine going to a game where you're competing and you're the only player. Actually, there's no entertainment. The entertainment isn't the game itself. The entertainment is the interaction, the social interaction between one gamer and another gamer, or 20 gamers with other 20 gamers. And that has value. And that value now in blockchain can be measured and can be rewarded. And given the choice between owning something or owning nothing, everyone will ultimately choose to own something. And I think sometimes people miss the point. They say, well, you know, is it about speculation or is it about prices? And that's an element.
And does it really distract to focus on earning rather than enjoying?
Well, and this is the thing. Everything that we purchase or spend or do says something about our personal character, our social character, and our identity. I mean, in the physical world as well. So the virtual item industry in games, not in blockchain games, is about $100 billion a year. And that $100 billion is all rental goods. And they're all mostly fashion items. They're basically things that make you look good. They're not actually functional items. You know, when you play these games, you know, you can play the game without paying any money, but then you earn these things, and what makes them desirable is the status they represent and the meaning that it sort of invokes in them when they actually have them. So this is really no different than the physical world.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But we still hear a lot of two opinions. I think the traditional gamers still defend the traditional way of just focusing on the experience. They compare it to playing football or basketball without any return. You know, it's just they want to enjoy. But yeah, I fully understand also the new angle. Yeah,
the reason why sports has become such a phenomenon is not only because we can view it and we can play it, but we can also participate in this economical way in which we can sort of have a co-ownership, right? And if you're a fan of something and you end up having this Ronaldo t-shirt, you're actually owning a piece of that history.
You feel you belong.
Exactly, it's belonging, and that has value, and that value affirms sort of this additional belief that there is something more stronger behind it.
Yes.
And that is basically no different than what can happen with Web3 and NFTs and blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yet, moving to Middle East. I want to know exactly what brought you to Middle East. Is it like, do you have projects across Middle East or GCC specifically or in the UAE? Like,
yes.
if you can let us know what type of projects you're working on.
I mean, we think of the whole MENA region as probably one of the fastest growing, most exciting spaces in terms of development. When you look at a place like Dubai, you know, I think of it as the original metaverse.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you know, when you come here 20, 30 years ago, there was literally nothing but sand. And we have our own project called the Sandbox. And we're basically really sort of being inspired by the story of Dubai in the sense that
the evolution.
The evolution of how you can create essentially a society, in our case digital, but in your case physical, that really didn't have anything per se, and now has become one of the most thriving ecosystems in the world. And that's really the promise of the open metaverse and what Web3 and NFTs can give, because it can create this sort of economic opportunity. So that's part of the inspiration. And of course, many of our portfolio companies are in Dubai or have moved to Dubai and also Abu Dhabi and so on. So that's kind of one area. But of course, we ourselves are also investing in the region where Web3 and blockchain is still in early stages. So we most recently announced a partnership with NEOM in Saudi.
Congratulations.
You know, they announced an investment in us to help them basically build out their Web3 strategy, which I think is, again, very encouraging, because it just shows that the region itself has a desire to be leading in the world.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's one of the reasons why I do spend a fair bit in this region, and will continue to do so.
Wishing you all the best with all the endeavors you're doing. Yatsu, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.